My name is Rena Lindevaldsen. I'm the interim dean here at Liberty University School of Law, also the associate director for the Liberty Center for Law and Policy. We're going to look at the question tonight of, do government officials have the authority to impose their morals on their citizens? Before we do that, I want to get into sort of a little background information. I'm sure all of you have had conversations at one time or another where somebody says, we're going to talk about the issue, let's pick some hot button issues tonight, abortion, same-sex marriage, or pick any issue along those lines. And if they're not on the same page as you with regard to what they believe, where they're at on morals issues, often you're going to hear them say, wait a minute, I don't want you to bring that Bible into the conversation. I want you to put your morals to the side, and let's have a conversation without bringing those things into the discussion. And so when we start that, we start down the path of this idea of neutrality. This idea, first of all, that we as individuals can remain neutral, that we don't have some set of worldview presumptions and assumptions that guide everything we do. But along the same lines, we have this idea that government can actually operate in a vacuum without also advocating for one set of morals or another, without also operating on this idea of its own worldviews. It's going to advocate somebody's worldviews. When you vote for legislation, there's a winner and there's a loser. Some people call this sort of the zero-sum game in a lot of these debates that take place where you try to compromise, but in the end, if you can't reach compromise, someone goes away unhappy and someone's walking away very happy. And that's happening in the public debate that we're having on these issues of morals. You talked for a lot of time about compromise, but in the end, there's winners and losers. And we're seeing that play out in a lot of things today, particularly in the religious liberties arena, where you have one side that's advocating you shouldn't be allowed to say things in the public square. Well, you either are or you're not going to be able to. Either going to have your First Amendment rights protected or you're not going to. So again, this idea of neutrality really is a fallacy, and someone's views are going to win, someone's going to lose. Let's take it out of the hot button issues. Okay, speed limits. Why do we even have speed limits, right? I mean, why is it 25 through a school area? Because kids cross the road and we value life, and so we want to make sure that everyone's traveling more slowly. So when the kids run out into the road, we can stop the car and we're not going to injure or kill them. A speed limit's of 55 versus 70. There's some room for play there depending on where we are and how open those roads are. But same thing for stop signs and stoplights. They're not beautiful. We don't put them there for that reason, but we're in a country that actually values life and realizes that when we come to an intersection where there's a lot of cars, chaos is going to ensue, and it's better to have some order to how that's going to operate so that we reduce the risk of danger to individuals and we protect life. Family. What is a family? How do you define a family? Who can marry? These are all moral judgments being made by society today, taking one view or the other. Let's stay away from these issues for a second. Taxes. Okay, are there no moral implications with regard to taxes and how much we're going to tax individuals? How much of your income when you go to work all week is the government going to take from you? And are there any moral implications on what they're taking from you after you've earned that income? Zoning regulations. Well, government has a right, to say if you can build, you can't build. Well, does government have that right? Can those zoning regulations be so restrictive that it actually prevents you from using the property that you rightfully obtained with that money that you earned? And do we have some rights inherent in the use of our properties after we've earned the money through our profession? So all of those have moral implications under them. So again, no neutrality. As Christians, let's take a step back and think about how we approach this. 2 Corinthians 10:5 tells us that we're to take every thought in obedience and captivity to Christ. What does that mean? Well, as we're looking at any of these issues from a Christian perspective, we have to realize Scripture informs us. We have to start with Scripture, understand what Scripture has to say about it, and then we take those values into the public square and we determine how we vote, how we advocate, what politicians we vote for, what legislation we support, what petitions do we sign. We are instructed as Christians to take all those thoughts and ideas and actions we do obedient to Christ, consistent with Scripture. And so when we're thinking about legislation, I only have one choice as a Christian. I don't have authority if I say I'm walking with Jesus Christ and want to live a consistent Christian worldview. My only choice is to advocate for things that are consistent with Scripture. And so that's the taking obedient, not only your thought life, but your actions. And so when I'm coming to these legislations on taxes, zoning, life, marriage, all of these issues, and I say I'm walking as a Christian, I want to live out my life as a Christian, I got to go to Scripture, and I don't have the authority to compromise on what Scripture says. I don't have the authority to say I'm going to take actions contrary to Scripture, only consistent with Scripture. Now obviously I can choose to do otherwise, right? But that's called living a sinful life. I mean, I can choose to act disobedient to Christ, but if I want to walk with the Lord and advocate in the public square for Christ, I got to act consistently with Scripture. So then that takes us to this question of, okay, so I individually have the right to act consistent with Scripture. I get to encourage my government to take steps consistent with Scripture. What does government have authority to do? And that's the authority. Why is government here? Again, as a Christian, where am I going to look? I'm going to go to Scripture. So Romans 13 really does help us out. There's a lot of places in Scripture, but this one's pretty clear as the purposes of civil government. So if you take a look at Romans 13, there's a few things that I want you to keep in mind. First of all, God didn't create government. God created people. He created people in their image with certain unalienable rights. So because God created people, we then have that authority to delegate back to government certain authority. Again, government can't do anything that we don't have authority to do. So let's take self-defense as a nation. Individuals, I have the right, if someone approaches me to kill me, to engage in self-defense. Whatever that step's going to be. Now, the law has some limits on that and steps you can take, but in general, the right to self-defense. Each of us has that. As a nation, we each have that right. We can delegate that then collectively to our national government to engage in the self-defense of our nation. But again, it's acting consistent with the delegated authority, and I have the authority as an individual to delegate that to civil government. So again, God didn't create government, He created people, and we delegate that authority. And then Romans 13 sets out some specific purposes for civil government. First of all, civil government only has the authority that which God has established. So civil government, if it's acting rightfully within its authority, just like individuals, should be acting consistent with Scripture. Because again, we're going to get to in a moment the laws of nature and nature's God and its implications on individuals and on nations. And so again, civil government should be acting consistently with Scripture. So it states in Romans 13, these rulers, these civil governments hold no terror for those who are doing right. If you're acting consistently with Scripture and doing that which is right, civil government is there to actually protect you and support you in doing that which is right. Now, by support, I don't mean lending money and helping you out to do that which is right, but to actually come alongside you and make sure you're protected in your choice to do that which is right. Romans 13 also says the purpose of civil government is to punish wrongdoers. Again, very clear definitions we have of what's right and wrong in Scripture, and civil government is to promote you in doing good and punish the wrongdoers, again with delegated authority from the people. So if you put that together, and you got government as a servant of God to do that which is right here on earth, to punish wrongdoers, and it's impossible for civil government to remain neutral, which we already discussed, then government is going to inherently advance a set of morals. The question is, which set of morals is it going to advance? So we're in America, so which set of morals are we going to advance in America? I'm going to take us back to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I'm sure some people in this room have heard the concept before that we have a godless Constitution. A few people say it out there, and divorce the Constitution from the Declaration of Independence on purpose. Because in a second, you're going to hear all the basis of the Declaration of Independence is reliance on biblical truth. So they need to separate them. But it's just like a corporation. The Declaration of Independence is really the articles. It animates the purpose for our country. Why did we exist? Why did we come into existence? And what are we here to do? And then when you get to the Constitution, it's the how, just like a company. Well, how are we going to elect people? How are we going to divide up the powers? The Secretary has this power. The President has this power. Same thing in the Constitution. So without the Declaration of Independence, that Constitution doesn't make any sense because it doesn't explain why we're here and what we're supposed to achieve. It's just the how. So what does the Declaration of Independence have to say that informs us of what our foundations are of the choices that government should be making? Well, we know it starts out with the few things. Laws of nature and nature's God. We're going to get to a second what that means. Certain truths are knowable. Stop there for a second. We live in a society that rejects the idea that truth is knowable, and our Declaration of Independence sets forth that there are truths that are knowable. Some of them are as follows, that we are created and we're created equal, which means we have a creator, and then that creator created us equal, endowed us with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The purpose of civil government, secure those rights. Now the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness isn't an exhaustive list. There are others, but those are the ones that were mentioned in the Declaration of Independence because those are the ones that in particular are being deprived of them when they stated their need for a Declaration of Independence. And so those are just some of them, and the purpose of civil government stated in the Declaration is to protect those rights. That's what we're here for. Then we have endow with our Creator with those rights. And government derives its just power from the consent of the governed. Again, back to us. We delegate power to the civil government. And the right and the duty of the people to alter or abolish a civil government that becomes destructive of the ends of protecting our unalienable rights. So when we're looking at the purpose of civil government and what we're going to advance, the Declaration is pretty clear. But let's go back to what the first thing that Declaration of Independence talks about, the laws of nature and nature's God. So we know there's truths, there's a Creator, we have unalienable rights, and something about our nation is based on the laws of nature and nature's God. Well, what in the world is that? And so we're going to look to Blackstone's Commentaries very briefly, because the commentaries are quite large. But the reason we're looking at Blackstone is, one, our founders relied on Blackstone a lot when it founded this nation. Two, if you were a young lawyer in early America, you studied Blackstone's Commentaries to learn the law. And the reason that you did that was because our laws actually derived from England. And so the common law of England carried over to the United States and formed our nation, except to the extent we changed it through our Constitution or any of the statutes that were passed. And so those laws that are discussed in Blackstone's Commentaries carry forward. And so what does he have to say about the laws of nature and nature's God, which our founders relied a lot on Blackstone? He sets them up, two things. The laws of nature and nature's God is the eternal, immutable laws of good and evil to which the Creator himself conforms, in which he has enabled human reason to discover. And we refer to this sometimes as natural law. So if you think about, as a Christian, you've been in church and you talk about that law that's written on man's heart, the Bible talks about, that's the natural law. We can know certain things about the moral code of God because God has written on that in everybody's heart. And we know that even if somebody doesn't hear the gospel presentation, God will hold them accountable to those moral code that's written on everybody's heart. That's the natural law. Through reason and what we see around us, that is discoverable. And so he also goes on to say it's binding in all countries, all over the globe, to all people. There is no escaping the fact that we are all bound by that natural law, or as he calls them, the laws of nature. But then there's the second half, so laws of nature and nature's God. And he refers to the nature's God actually as it's Scripture. It's revealed law. So you've got the code written on our hearts. It's binding upon everybody, regardless of what they hear about the gospel or Scripture. And then laws of nature and nature's God, it's the revealed Scripture. And what I like about it is his explanation of why he says not only we needed Scripture, one, to tell us the gospel, so we know how we could accept that gift of Jesus Christ dying on the cross and the resurrection. But in addition to hearing that saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, he says our minds were impacted by our sinful nature. And so while you could discover the laws of nature through reason, because of our fallen minds, Blackstone says, God gave us that revealed law so that we could know what it is we're supposed to do and the moral code we're supposed to follow. So take that back to the Declaration of Independence, and we're based on the laws of nature and nature's God, and through that we know there's a Creator, there's truth, there's unalienable rights. So take that to the question of the day. Does our civil government have the authority to impose its moral views on its citizens? You're looking at our foundation, it's really the fact that as citizens, we are the ones voting for legislation. We're acting through our government. And so, of course, government's going to have that authority to choose laws that are consistent with Scripture, particularly given the history of our country. One other thing we hear a lot, and this is coming up in today's discussion, is this concept of just and unjust laws. And Blackstone talked about that. Martin Luther King Jr. in a letter from the Birmingham jail talked about this idea that if anything consistent with Scripture is a just law. If it's inconsistent with Scripture or causes you to take action inconsistent with Scripture, it's an unjust law. So Martin Luther King, when he was writing his letter, was advocating for the church to realize there are certain things that are going on in this country that are wrong at this time, denying the fact that people are born equal, created equal in God's image and certain unalienable rights, and the country at that time was denying that. He's saying, church, wake up. That's unjust, and the time to act is now, he said. And so there were laws that were unjust, and he said, as a result, he engaged in civil disobedience. It was the right thing to do to engage in civil disobedience to a law that was unjust and contrary to Scripture. So when we look at the laws today, we have our just laws, unjust laws, laws that are right, laws that are good, and we can look back to Scripture, and we have examples of heroes of the faith who understood this very concept as well. Daniel, he prayed when he was told not to pray. We've got Esther. He comes before the king when, without being requested or invited before the king, should have deserved death. But she was willing to disobey the protocol, willing to disobey that, risk death, to go before the king to ask to save her people because God had told her that's what she's supposed to do. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We all know that story. We sing songs about it in church. But those are individuals who were told by the king, bow down and worship a false god. And they refused. Civil disobedience, because that was asking you to act contrary to Scripture, and they refused to do it. And as a result, they were put into the furnace, and God chose to save them under those circumstances. But again, they knew the difference between just laws and unjust laws. And in that instance, that was civil government acting outside its authority. Civil government doesn't have the rightful authority from God to order you to do things that are contrary to Scripture. And so, again, we see an example of an unjust law and how we stood up. So to wrap it all up, to answer the question, we started with yes, because government is naturally going to impose someone's set of values. So as a nation founded on biblical truth, we got government's only just authority being derived from God, and its purpose is to protect those unalienable rights that we've been given, not to infringe them, as we're seeing take place a lot in society today. So when people ask about laws that are being imposed, whether it's zoning or taxes or marriage or abortion, in those issues, government doesn't have authority to say that these things are appropriate because they're contrary to Scripture. And so we have to understand that distinction. So as an individual, I absolutely have the right. No one has the right in this country to tell me that I cannot advocate my beliefs even though they're based on biblical principles. Everyone's coming to the table with a set of worldview, with a worldview set of assumptions. And naturally, we're going to be able to do that. As a nation, when we enact those laws, then it has the authority in this country to be able to say, I'm going to set a law in place that is consistent with Scripture. Now, I need to balance that, right? Because we also know there's the First Amendment, and I believe properly there's a First Amendment. Everybody has the right to worship according to the dictates of their conscience. And in fact, nowhere in the Bible does it say that we're supposed to force people to believe, because you can't force people to believe. So we're balancing this by the fact that we can impose a set of laws that are consistent with Scripture as long as we allow for the freedom of worship, the freedom of speech, those First Amendment rights that are protected. So in closing, I want to close with a quote by Chuck Colson. And it says, in every action we take, we're doing one of two things. With that quote, I want you to keep in mind, when you make a decision as an individual and a nation, you're doing only one of two things. You are either seeking to help God in transforming the world to reflect His righteousness, or advancing the rule of Satan, or establishing the reign of God. And so when you think about that quote, there's only two things. There's no fence sitting, there's no lukewarm, there's no middle ground. You're either helping to advance God's kingdom here on earth with righteousness and truth, or you're taking the other route. And as for Christians, we should be seeking to have our government take the route that helps set up a set of moral codes that is consistent with Scripture to help people live right and godly lives while giving them the freedom of worship, free speech, and the right to make that choice for themselves. Thank you.